Hi, I'm Tom Weaver, a monster kid who's always been up to his 3 eyeballs in old outer space monster movies, outer space TV series like Men into Space, etc. I can get so immersed in that stuff that, embarrassingly, I sometimes half forget that in the era when my favorites were made, the 50s, the space race era, the world had put no one into space, no satellite into space. When is a year not a year? When it's the International Geophysical Year, IGY, an 18-month period extending from mid-1957 to the end of 1958. In that period, over 60 countries, west and east, pledged to do deep dives in a variety of scientific subjects and share their findings with the world, oceanography, seismology, etc. Well, just a few months into the IGY, Soviet Russia launched Sputnik. The word Sputnik is Russian for Earth Satellite. And that's just what it was, the first ever satellite launched into space. Sputnik took off from a secret site. It was about 22 inches around and weighed 185 pounds. Remember that, 185 pounds. If a satellite that size doesn't sound like a big deal to you, well, it was in America, where our space scientists thought they were hot stuff with the smaller 20-pound satellite that they had on their drawing boards. It's all fun and games until somebody loses a space race. America had cosmic egg on its face, and Russia was dining out on their achievement, boasting about their new sources of power, announcing that they already had bigger, heavier, better satellites in the works, stating that trips to the Moon, Mars, and Venus were now possible. You just know how pleased Soviet Russia was with itself when they told the rest of the world about Sputnik before they told their own citizens. Then there was the military side of it. If Russia could successfully launch space rockets, that meant that a series of missiles could, with reasonable accuracy, be fired from one spot on Earth and hit any other spot. A Virginia newspaper editorialized, "It must be conceded that the Soviets have won out on the experiments into outer space. When it is considered that the United States only planned to launch a satellite the size of a basketball and weighing 21.5 pounds, and not until the spring of 1958, it is evident that once again we stand up against Russia with too little too late. The Russians have every right to be jubilant about their success, for the results will be of immense scientific significance to all mankind, for peace or for war. We cannot be content to continue to take a back seat in such scientific developments. Such developments will undoubtedly change the whole course of future warfare and make obsolete any chain of bases operated around the world by the Western nations," unquote. In a minute, I'll tell you why I subjected you to that boring history lesson. But in the meantime, I want to mention that for a low-budget movie made at warp speed, the camera work in Blood Beast often impresses. Dave's run down the hill was nicely framed with the fallen tree in the foreground, and now that he's wielding a fire extinguisher, you just know that we're going to get a face full of it.
Dave, CO2 fire extinguishers! CO2!
A few seconds ago, Donna's back filled the frame, and then she ran away from the camera, and now she stands in the perfect spot where we can see her through the opening. In a little bit, there'll be a subjective shot of Donna snapping a picture, and while Dave is at the Jeep talking on the radio, we can see Donna working in the distance. A number of neat shots just in this one short scene. The DP, John Nicholas, went on to shoot a number of Outer Limits episodes, including such favorites as the premiere episode The Galaxy Being, The Sixth Finger, and The Xanthi Misfits.
Ready? Cheese!
Over the pre-credits sequence and the credits, I talked about Sputnik, but I want to go back to them now. Martin Varno, who wrote Blood Beast, was still a kid at the time, 21 years old. Varno was already, at that age, a longtime pal of Forey Ackerman. I once stumbled across a Variety article from, I think, 1954, about Ackerman trying to make Varno, who was then 17, a science fiction TV producer, and a judge having to step in to prevent it. I love these high spots of the Switchback Road. I love that they found that road and filmed it the way they did. Varno, 17 years old, and Ackerman's trying to make him a producer. All my life, I've been trying to figure out whether Ackerman was nuts or if he was really, really nuts. and I still haven't decided. More on Varno later. My point now is that in Famous Monsters 35, published in 1965, there was a Blood Beast film book. In preparation for this commentary, I read it for the first time, and, as usual with FM film books, I got the feeling that whoever wrote it typing with one hand and holding the movie's script open with the other hand. Or maybe Martin Varno wrote the film book. Either way, the film book differs from the movie here and there, and I'm going to assume that these variations came right out of the script. The film book's opening paragraphs make me think that Varno wanted the movie to open with more than just a 20-second cartoon representation of the X-100 takeoff. The film book starts, "Midnight at Cape Canaveral. On the launching pad stands the silver-white X-100, bathed in the blinding glow of a dozen floodlights as its fuel tanks are filled with hydrogen and liquid oxygen. This, the first missile which will penetrate the veil of the Van Allen radiation belt and bear a manned space capsule into the upper atmosphere, has been constructed outside the knowledge of the general public. It will be launched in the same secrecy. The top priority security cover will endure until the final result is discovered. Within the capsule atop the X-100 sits Major John Corcoran, an astronaut whose fate lies wholly in the hands of science, destined for overwhelming greatness if he returns alive. If, instead, the experiment fails, he will die an unknown death. The scientists will deny the existence of any such experiment. But John Corcoran is accustomed to such risks and accepts them without complaint. So it looks like Varno may have wanted the opening part of the picture to convey more information than it did. And as usual with Roger Corman pictures from this era, something's going on behind the credits. Sometimes it's artwork with the images shifting around. Sometimes it's animation. There's usually something to make them more interesting, and I always like and appreciate that. Before I go on about that, to quote-unquote explain how the Blood Beast came to Earth, we'll see the layer of mud flopping around, and then we'll get the impression that something invisible is moving through the brush. And that's all the explanation we get for the Blood Beast's appearance on Earth. Even from a 21-year-old screenwriter, I think we deserved better than that. And I know you know that we're hearing the main title music again. Finishing up talking about the title design of Roger Corman's pictures from the 50s, he frequently hired someone to cook up something fun. On Blood Beast, Bill Martin got an on-screen credit as title designer. He did several Corman pictures at that time, including Teenage Caveman.
This rip was smaller when we first got here. Would the stress of settling into the ground have widened it? How could that be the entire...
Now entering from the left, Tyler McVeigh, a radio actor in the old days. And then when TV came in, he started doing live TV shows. And only then did he appear in his first movie, which was science fiction, The Day the Earth Stood Still. To go off on a tangent for just a few seconds, in Day the Earth Stood Still, he played the government man who shows up at the boarding house looking for Michael Rennie. McVeigh told me that he did the interior scene inside the boarding house first, and then 3 weeks later, the scene where he arrived at the boarding house by car and walks up the steps to the door. His salary was $500 a week, and because of Hollywood's wacky rules, he was paid for the whole 3 weeks. During those 3 weeks, of course, he was making money doing radio shows and whatever else. He told me that his thought at the time was, about working in movies, this is a wonderful way to make a living. I talked to him just a few days after his 90th birthday. When I asked Martin Varno to rate the performances in Blood Beast, he said everybody was pretty awful. He singled out Georgiana Carter, who just stood around looking perplexed. But then he added, the only real honest-to-God actor there was Tyler McVeigh. Tyler was a wonderful actor, a consummate professional, a lovely man, a wonderful man, unquote. McVeigh is also in this Blu-ray's companion feature, Attack of the Giant Leeches. Alexander Laszlo's music for Blood Beast. As always, I get all my music information from musicologist and CD producer David Schechter of Monstrous Movie Music, mmmrecordings.com. David is pretty positive that under the credits, we're hearing a Nova chord, a very early synthesizer that you hear in lots of Universal horror films of the 40s. Me being a Universal Horrors fan from way back, I especially like the Nova chord stingers we hear in The Mummy's Ghost, as the mummy is carrying the girl into the swamp.
lab.
Right. Dave, get a blanket.
Interrupting myself, Martin Varno told me, quote, the exteriors of the tracking station facility were shot on Mount Lee, near the famous Hollywood sign, outside what was the first television station in Los Angeles. It's up there at the top of the hill, and I got permission to shoot there simply by picking up a telephone and asking for it. Nobody else had ever had that idea. I guess everybody assumed that the city wouldn't allow it. Well, I thought to myself, why not call the city and find out? I called, and the city said sure, but there was a fee. In those days, there was an $8 fee per actor. The crew could be any size, so that's all we had to pay, $8 times 6 actors. In our interview, Blood Beast producer Gene Corman talked about the places it was shot.
We shot Blood Beast in Bronson Canyon, and we also went up into the Hollywood Hills and used a radio station right above the Hollywood sign for the film's tracking station. Since we had a great deal of day for night to shoot, we were always chasing the shadows up there, trying to block out the sun. That was one of the more mobile units I've ever been involved with. Normally, everybody chases the sun. We were chasing the shadows.
By all medical standards, this man is dead. No heartbeat, no respiration. Yet his tissues refuse to dissipate.
In addition to dealing with the enigma of the dead but not dead Corcoran, our heroes now cannot communicate with Cape Canaveral or anybody in the outside world. As in The Thing, as in Attack of the Crab Monsters, as in Navy versus the Night Monsters, as in half the old movies where military people and scientists are trapped in an isolated spot and menaced by a monster. But chain-smoking Dave is going to keep trying. I've always liked actor Ed Nelson, and he gave me a great interview in an old playhouse full of bats here in New York when he was doing the gin game with Beverly Garland. We reconnected at a couple film festivals in later years. One year, during the running of the New York Marathon, amidst hundreds of thousands of people watching the runners, we bumped into each other. Ask him about a movie in which he had even the smallest part, practically an extra, and he'd have 20 minutes of stories. But he did not remember Night of the Blood Beast at all. I tried a bunch of ways to jog his memory, but it was all gone. Blood Beast no longer existed in his memory banks, which was so surprising to me after the way he'd gone on and on about movies where he was in and out in 30 seconds. Blood Beast was among the first movies where he was one of the stars and all memories had disappeared. I will mention one of the funny things he said about Roger Corman. He said Corman had made 2 or 3 pictures before he found out you could do a take 2.
What is it?
Gene Corman is the Corman no monster kid ever asks about, and, while he was alive, no monster kid except me ever bothered to interview, to the best of my knowledge. Here's what the movie's director, Bernard Kowalski, told me about Gene Corman.
Gene has a tremendous sense of humor, and he is a very highly competitive individual. He's an art connoisseur and a man of extremely fine taste. We were making these movies for $65,000 and $70,000, and Gene would practically go to the hospital after each show. Such was his total dedication and involvement. He's someone who does no film, does no costs, and is truly a class act.
Fouled up outside? What's happening in there?
I don't know.
Just to finish up on the music of Blood Beast, David Schechter tells me that Hungarian-born composer Alexander Laszlo made part of his living by taking the music he wrote for various projects and putting it in his music library, and then letting others pay to use it. According to David, Blood Beast appears to be an original score by Laszlo. Obviously, once he composed the Blood Beast music, it went into his library because the main title cue on Novacord is heard again in 2 other Roger Corman, Gene Corman movies, Beast from Haunted Cave and Attack of the Giant Leeches. David tells me that according to the rules of Hollywood, quote, it wasn't legal to reuse music tracks the way they did in Haunted Cave and Giant Leeches, but low-budget filmmakers and composers did it all the time anyway. Blood Beast's #1 fan Larry Blameyer on this very scene.
Night of the Blood Beast reminds me of other low-budget compound movies like The Killer Shrews and to some extent Attack of the Crab Monsters, where the isolation of the characters generates suspense and has them kind of holed up in a fort. Here, this commences only when John Corcoran, or Corcoran as Ed Nelson calls him, is returned to the facility. It's then, just past the 14-minute mark, that we first experience the sense of dread that something's out there, when Dave ventures outside to check the tower. This sequence shows nice economy of storytelling and mounting uneasiness. The gently swinging ladder puts us on edge, and when Dave unlocks the gate, his back is turned to camera, and the POV is through darkened leaves, telling us that something is watching from the bushes. The lights in the facility sputter and dim. The bushes then part, alerting Dave, who is covered in close-ups, which makes us uncomfortable because we can't see what's near him. Back to the bushes POV, a dark shape rises, filling the frame. As Dave draws his sidearm, the camera then pushing in quickly on his rapid fire. Following a scream that sure doesn't sound like Ed Nelson, the others come rushing out. But just when we think the sequence is over, there comes a crash from inside. This is unexpected and nicely disconcerting. The thing is in the building.
When Dave fired his .45, we heard the sound of a gun firing. But, amusingly, in the Blood Beast trailer, we hear the sound of a much smaller caliber gun. Also, in the trailer, there's a little footage we don't see in the movie. Dave has a hard time pulling the gun.
It went down. Wounded animal that large isn't good.
Next up is another tense scene, but listen to the terribly inappropriate music. Sounds like a snippet from a symphony of the 1800s.
Yeah, just clip me.
It's inside.
It's like somebody decided at the last minute that they needed music in this scene, and Gene Corman grabbed the top record in the record stack next to his Hi-Fi and said, "Here, use this." Now we're hearing the movie's main title music again, Novacord repeatedly playing the 7-note main theme, this time low and eerie. When you're talking about a movie about mud piggybacking to Earth on a rocket and then turning into a monster and turning an astronaut into a breeding ground, you kind of hesitate to nitpick at little plot holes. But even as a kid, I couldn't understand why the Cape Canaveral people aren't all over this location. But they don't come. This movie takes place over a period of days, and nobody ever shows up. And the only quote-unquote explanation we get is just dopey double talk. Lines like, Cape Canaveral may not realize they're incommunicado, whatever that means. I had Martin Varno rewatch the movie before our interview, and even he had to point out how dumb that was. Quote, if communication broke down between Cape Canaveral and that tracking station, there'd be an army of people descending on the place to determine why. Varno just took the idea of being isolated from older sci-fis without realizing those people were isolated because they were at the North Pole or on an island or whatever. These people are just in the woods with American towns all around.
You need some help boarding the window.
Occasionally, this movie has something about it that makes Outer Limits come to my mind. Something about the low lighting and mood, maybe. And I'm not the first guy to point this out. I'll add a few Outer Limits musical jingles. What say you? Michael Emmet, John Baer, Tyler McVeigh, Angela Greene. Somebody punch me in the head so I can see some stars. Now, finally, Night of the Blood Beast, the background. The reason I talked about Sputnik for 3 minutes at the beginning of this commentary is I don't think a lot of monster kids realize how quote-unquote important it was to 1950s sci-fi movie history. Within a couple of days of that October 1957 event, 43 films involving satellites and spaceships were announced for production. So we have Sputnik to thank for the existence of a number of science fiction favorites. Roger Corman always liked to look to the headlines for movie ideas, and pretty soon after Sputnik, he got busy with War of the Satellites. And by a funny fluke, As he was putting finishing touches on War of the Satellites, America launched its first satellite, Explorer, and that was all over front pages when Corman's new sci-fi movie was set to debut. As a side note, I'll mention that War of the Satellites was paired with another torn from the headline Corman movie, The Crybaby Killer. That was based on a recent killing spree by a kid in Nebraska. Now, early 1958, Corman, inspired by the space race still in the news, was ready to do another outer space sci-fi. How did Varno get the job of writing it? According to Forey Ackerman in Nebula magazine in 1958, Gene Corman called to ask him to recommend someone who could write a lickety-split script for an ultra-low-budget sci-fi, and the reader gets the impression that Ackerman suggested Varno. But Varno told me that screenwriter Jerome Bixby was offered the job. Bixby was too busy to do it, and he recommended Varno. So, who knows? Ackerman wrote about the movie a lot at the time, 1958, probably because he had that teeny-tiny connection. In the June 1958 issue of Nebula, he wrote that the title Attack of the Star Beasts was briefly considered.
The last count was 140/80.
Now, more Ackerman weirdness. He wrote that Varno was going to play a dinosaur tamer in Roger Corman's Teenage Caveman, which was in production while Varno was writing his Blood Beast script. And he also reported that Varno was going to be one of the stars of Blood Beast. I wish I'd known about this stuff when I interviewed Varno. I'm sure he would have shot him down as Acker pipe dreams. In Space Travel magazine, Ackerman wrote that, quote, ardent SF reader and talented brush wielder Ron Cobb, unquote, had done artwork for the picture. Quote, wait till you see the monster Cobb has come up with for this one. It out-creatures the Thing, unquote. Interrupting myself, even before the movie's made, Ackerman is already tying it to the Thing. Kind of a tip-off that even then he knew how much of a rip-off of the Thing Martin Varno had written. Now, it's interesting and exciting to hear that the great Ron Cobb did concept art of the monster for the movie, but wait a second. In 1958, Ron Cobb was a kid, just 20, even younger than Martin Varno. I bet Ackerman had Cobb do concept art of the monster and gave it to the Cormans, and they rejected it for whatever reason. And by the way, what's with Ackerman always hanging around with kids? The last time I hung around with 20-year-olds, I was 20. Totally ignorant about Gene Corman, when I was a knee-high monster kid, I assumed that Roger, once he became a busy producer-director, tossed his kid brother a bone and brought him into the business. Nope, Gene had a big Hollywood job years before anyone had ever even heard of Roger Corman. Gene told me why he got into producing.
I was vice president of MCA for about 7 years. Early on, it seemed to be an area that excited me, and I had a very responsible position. I represented Joan Crawford, Fred McMurray, Ray Milland, Harry Belafonte, Richard Conte. I had a very strong list of stars at that point. But it wasn't really anything that I saw as terribly creative. And I found, as an agent, that I was functioning as a producer. For instance, with Joan Crawford, who had more careers than probably any other major star that I know of, Joan went through a quiet period after she left Warner Brothers, and there was a question of how to place her, what to do with her. There was a Western book I had read, Johnny Guitar, by Roy Chancellor, that was really suitable as a film vehicle for, say, Clark Gable and Two Women. I gave it to Joan to read with the idea that maybe we would move it in a different direction. Maybe she would be the lead, she would be Clark Gable, and we'd put 2 other men in. I was representing Nicholas Ray at that point, too, so I put the whole project together. And I found I was doing the same with Fred McMurray and with Ray Milland when he left Paramount. I was then a producer. So I then moved with Roger into making the teenage protest films. It was a natural adjunct, having represented Nick Ray through Rebel Without a Cause in 1955 and several of his other pictures. I knew through first-hand experience what the sum and substance was about. True, the first picture that we made together, Hot Car Girl in 1958, had a very modest budget, so we were not able to do anything on the same scale as what Nick had done, but it served us well.
Here's Angela Greene's quote-unquote big scene in the movie. Her character, Julie, was in the truck with Steve and Dave when they learned that her fiancé, Corcoran, was dead, and Julie took it bravely. In the Famous Monsters film book, which probably reflects Martin Varno's script, her immediate reaction to the bad news was, quote, the usual quota of feminine weeping, unquote. But here in the movie, she holds herself together until this scene. Angela Greene, the only girl of 7 children, born in Dublin, Ireland. When she was 7, an uncle adopted her, and she went to live with his family in Flushing, New York. As a teenager, she became a model. She was maybe 20 in 1941 when she was named Miss Rheingold. That same year, she appeared on a Saturday Evening Post cover by Norman Rockwell. In New York, she was a showgirl escorted by well-to-do men. One of her beaux was John F. Kennedy, then a Navy officer on PT boats. She was acting in a Broadway play when a Warner Brothers scout took notice. She did a Warner Brothers screen test and was signed to a contract. At Warner's, she played small parts and bit parts in features, but did have good-sized roles in a couple of shorts. In 1946, she married a wealthy realtor. She was a regular on the Dick Tracy TV series, playing Tess Trueheart, and began playing occasional movie leads. In 1951, the Sci-Fi films The Day the Earth Stood Still and The Thing were hits. In 1958, Greene co-starred in The Cosmic Man, which was the poor man's Day the Earth Stood Still, and a few months later, Blood Beast, which was the poor man's The Thing. When Greene was not acting, she and her husband socialized a great deal and participated in many charities and fundraising events. In 1978, she died after a stroke, just a few weeks shy of her 57th birthday. Some more inappropriate music here. Getting back to Gene Corman, his first picture as producer, Hot Car Girl, which began production in late February 1958. Roger was executive producer, John Nicholas on camera, 28-year-old Bernard Kowalski is the director. The same 4 people go on to Night of the Blood Beast, which started filming on May 19, and then Attack of the Giant Leeches in October. I asked Kowalski what input executive producer Roger Corman had.
He was involved creatively and financially. Roger would supervise the shows. Gene was running the shows. It was an embryonic period for Gene in that area, and Roger, with more experience, was standing back and just guiding Gene as well as myself. On Blood Beast, the shooting schedule was 7 days. Budget was around $68,000.
Dr. Wyman. Half his head's gone.
The finish for Dr. Wyman. We hear that half his head is gone, but the Famous Monsters film book, and therefore probably Varno's script, had the whole head gone. Before I can talk more about this scene, Larry Blameyer needs to set you up for the next big scare.
After the film's supreme shock moment, you'd think they might let up. Not so director Kowalski and DP John Nicholas. Even as Wyman's body is taken down in shadow, they frame a shot of the exam room window bookended by the ladies. Close-up of hand reaching up into frame. Back to the 2-shot as a scary lit John rises staring between them. Punch in on John with a kind of zombie look, then whip pan to tight on Donna, where we are rewarded with a full-throated scream. More super efficient storytelling and chills.
Michael Emmet, briefly seen at the beginning of the movie as the disasteronaut in the crashing rocket, now returns at the movie's midpoint to start earning his top billing. Looking over his IMDb list, I see that he did a mountain of TV and very few movies. There are just 7 on the list, and in 4 of them, he was uncredited. I think Emmet might have had a friend at Variety. I recently watched Bombers B-52, and toward the end, Emmet has a tiny uncredited role as a pilot, but the Variety reviewer included him on a list of the actors who were good in their roles. Bernard Kowalski also liked Emmet, telling me,
Michael Emmet and I had worked together on the series Boots and Saddles. He was a regular on it, and I had experienced maybe 8 of the 13 shows with Michael having a major role. He was a good, hard-working actor. Coming over to the Corman shows after having worked with Michael, I thought that he was a leading man type that we could afford. He was always just terrific to work with and a thorough gentleman.
The death of Dr. Wyman was no doubt inspired by the scene in The Thing. We see no body hanging upside down in The Thing, but we're told about two bodies, two scientists, Olson and Auerbach, killed in the greenhouse by the Thing so that the Thing would be able to use their blood to grow a batch of little things. Dr. Stern, who almost became Mr. Hanging Upside Down victim number 3, but escaped by the skin of his teeth, later tells Captain Hendry,
I don't remember my head. I must have fallen. When I came to, I saw Olson and Auerbach. They were... Give me some more of that. Get those axes. Go ahead, Doctor.
The ugly marks on Corcoran's body, I assume they were the work of makeup man Harry Thomas. He didn't get a screen credit, but he used to say that Blood Beast was one of the movies he worked on, and when I asked Martin Varno, he said he definitely remembered Harry on the set. One thing I don't like about Wyman's death scene, the Blood Beast snuck up on him, I assume, and killed him, and ate or ripped off half his head and hoisted him up over that bar, and none of the 4 people sleeping a few feet away heard anything? Getting back to the Famous Monsters film book, I had issue 35 as a kid but never read the film book till now. The story gets up to about the 3/4 point of the movie and then it ends. Either a page was accidentally omitted from the issue, or whoever wrote the film book got tired of writing at that point and called it quits. If that film book was ever reprinted, which it probably was, I'm sure it was still incomplete.
Brought on by the contraction of the mesentery blood vessels in the pressure change of landing.
John has begun talking like Dr. Wyman, spouting information that only Dr. Wyman would have, and that makes us think again of Attack of the Crab Monsters. The crab monsters took their victims' heads and consumed them or assimilated them or God knows what, and after that the crabs now had all the knowledge of each victim and even talked with the victim's voice. Obviously, the Blood Beast has that same bizarre ability. What Dr. Wyman knew, the Blood Beast, having taken half of Wyman's head, now knows, and even Corcoran, who apparently has some kind of psychic connection with the Blood Beast, now knows. Confirmation of the fact that this plot twist came from crab monsters. Later in the movie, the Blood Beast will talk with the voice of Dr. Wyman.
It didn't come here to destroy.
Johnny.
Martin Varno was on the Blood Beast sets at Kling Studios during the filming, and he told me he was bugged by certain things that went on. I'll talk more about that later, and he realized how underpaid he was, and he didn't like the movie when he saw it. Martin had a long list of complaints. Another thing that bugged him at the time, another raspberry seed in his wisdom tooth, is that Gene Corman got a story credit for Blood Beast. Varno told me that when he was hired to write Blood Beast, Gene, quote, had some sort of a weird idea for the picture and he threw that at me, unquote, and Roger and other people threw ideas at him too. Varno gave me the impression that he disregarded most of what was thrown at him and wrote an original screenplay. A couple of times he called it his original screenplay. You know, if I'd borrowed as much as he borrowed from The Thing, and It Conquered the World, and Attack of the Crab Monsters, plus, you'd never hear the words original screenplay come out of my mouth.
How will it work with the power?
When I hit the lotto and become a billionaire, one of my purchases will be a fish tank full of seahorses with artwork of ribs on the back wall of the tank as a tribute to Blood Beast. We're told that these creatures were the critters in his bloodstream, growing fast. You'd think that those things busting out of John's blood vessels would have caused him some discomfort. A lot of Monster Kid writers call Corcoran a pregnant man, and even the Blood Beast trailer narrator calls the Blood Beast, quote, the first satellite creature to impregnate man with its chromosomes, unquote. The Variety reviewer wrote, it's finally happened. Someone wrote a story about a pregnant man. Obviously, the next bit of action was inspired by The Thing. The Blood Beast busts open a door, and the guys try to destroy it with fire. In the long shot that's coming up, Donna, on the left, what is she looking at before she picks up the lantern?
Steve, don't shoot him, I'll hurt you. Steve, don't shoot! Don't shoot him, I'll...
Here. Getting back to the pregnant man idea, when I brought this up to Martin Varno, he poo-pooed it. I didn't think of it in terms of a pregnant man. I was just thinking of the astronaut's body as a vehicle to get the little alien critters to Earth, unquote. And I I agree with Varno. I think calling Corcoran a pregnant man is silly. In Alien, the baby alien busts out of Hurt's body, but I don't know if anybody's ever called Hurt a pregnant man. Lawrence Harvey, with his head full of earwig eggs in Night Gallery, is he pregnant? So I'd never have thought of Corcoran as quote-unquote pregnant either. Blood Beast is one of many movies. The Quatermass Experiment, Creeping Unknown, is another, about an Earthman changed or mutated by a trip into space. Of course, now in 2024, we know that things like that just don't happen. Or do they? I recall a story from just a couple years ago when a guy who spent a year on the International Space Station came back to Earth, and NASA then compared him to his identical twin brother. Well, they weren't identical anymore. Even after 2 years home on Earth, 7% of the spaceman's genes had not returned to normal. Varno again turns to the Thing. In this scene, Corcoran is loaded up with Dr. Carrington-style dialogue. Why does it have to be killed? It's the first of its kind to come to the Earth, etc. I like that they gave Corcoran an engagement ring on his hand. Or maybe that's Emmet's real-life wedding ring. According to IMDb, he had 7 children.
Pistol has an engulfing flame plus a delayed explosion. It's better than a lantern.
Very pistol?
Very pistol, yes. Designed in the 1800s by a military man, Edward Wilson Very. And another steal from The Thing. Remember the fire scene in The Thing, where the alien bursts into the room and the men douse it with kerosene, and then Mac shoots him with a Very pistol? Having a Very pistol in his script was a mistake that annoyed Martin Varno decades later. Quote, the people at the tracking station wouldn't have had Very pistols. If you happen to have a boat, Very pistols are wonderful for signaling over water, but anywhere else they start forest fires. But that's okay. A little artistic license there. For a place with no electricity and no lights, this place is pretty well lit. Martin Varno was living in Denver when I found him in 2002. He would have been around 65 then, but he told me he was in a wheelchair. He also told me that his hobby was photography, and he'd get on buses and go all around Denver taking photos. He said he was very proud of his photos. Then I asked him to take a picture of himself that I can include in the article when it ran in a magazine. And he hemmed and hawed a little, but eventually took the picture and mailed it to me, and it was so crummy that I hesitated to use it. So I don't know about his photographic hobby claims. He dug talking to me and sent me a bunch of short articles he'd written for fun. One was about his father, one about working behind the scenes on the Veil TV series and observing Boris Karloff, etc. Unfortunately, I had to eventually give him the heave-ho. Like Richard Bojarski and a few others, Varno was a night owl who liked calling people in the middle of the night. I'd tell him it was 1 a.m. or whatever, and that he'd woken me up, and he'd go, sorry, and then he'd talk a blue streak for an hour. That happened a couple times. I told him he needed to call me earlier a couple times, and then I did with him the same thing I did with Bojarski. I started turning the ringer off at night and ignoring the messages he'd leave. I had to cut him off, which I didn't want to do, but he got to be a little too much of a kook. The Blood Beast exteriors, all shot in Griffith Park, where Roger Corman would shoot pretty regularly. He should have had his office there. John Baer had small parts in a lot of movies early in his career, but then, like Michael Emmet, he became mostly TV. When a mole man catches a bullet in Superman and the Mole Men, Baer was the hospital doctor who took it out of him. The music will now become very pastoral, which doesn't fit the mood. Another record off Gene Corman's Hi-Fi?
That means the magnetic field must be broken. It must be dead. We better make certain.
Bernard Kowalski told me about the shooting of Blood Beast.
We did some rewriting as we got into it. These kind of shows are made as a collaborative effort. Everyone did everything, which is a wonderful way to work. I mean, everyone's totally involved. Everyone cares. Though they were 7-day shows and the titles were exploitative, we wanted them to be the very best we could possibly make them. For instance, Danny Haller was the art director, and he would pull a trailer onto the soundstage and sleep there, and do a lot of the sawing and hammering himself. It was tremendous fun because everyone was just doing their best.
Well,
That seems like the most likely place for it.
Kowalski mentioned doing some rewriting along the line. Well, Martin Varno, who was at Kling Studios during production, got kind of rankled by the way that was done, and he got rankled once he found out how terribly he'd been underpaid. And he got rankled by the fact that Gene Corman was going to get a story credit for the picture. Well, eventually it all boiled over, and in the booklet that accompanies these Blu-rays, he describes what happened. But I'll give you the digest version here right now. Briefly, the Variety Gossip column, November 28, 1958, quote, Martin Varno is suing Roger and Gene Corman and Balboa Productions for $2,400 plus original story credit on Night of the Blood Beast, unquote. $2,400 in 1958 is over $26,000 in 2024. Yep, Martin Varno took it to the Writers Guild, became a member, and the Writers Guild went after the Cormans. Read about it in the booklet, and or read a lot more about it by reading my Varno interview in my book Eye on Science Fiction. Here, however, I'll give you an extra tidbit that's not in the booklet or the book. Interrupting myself, in the trailer we see the Blood Beast grab the girl in a long shot, not in a medium close-up as we see here. Your bonus anecdote about the Writers Guild kerfuffle. Leo Gordon, the veteran tough guy actor, was also a movie and TV writer. In 1958, when Blood Beast was made, Gordon had already written The Crybaby Killer and Hot Car Girl for the Cormans. Well, Varno told me that when he sued the Cormans, Leo stepped up and offered to testify on Varno's behalf at the first hearing, which was the one about Varno's payment. The second hearing was about the story credit. Leo Gordon told Varno he'd been screwed and offered to testify. Varno continued, quote, but Leo Gordon was a ringer set up by Roger Corman. They were buddies. I could tell you a lot more about Leo Gordon. I won't. He was a real sleaze job, unquote. Roger and Gene Corman's buddy Leo Gordon went on to write for Roger or Gene or both Giant Leeches, The Wasp Woman, The Cat Burglar, Tower of London, The Terror, Tobruk. On my Giant Leeches commentary, you'll hear what Gene Corman said to me about Leo. And by the way, before I forget, I get a kick out of Gene Corman's signature, his handwritten name, in the Blood Beast credits, like this was some prestige production that he wanted to sign. We just got another few glimpses of the Blood Beast. Roger Corman had used that costume a few weeks earlier in Teenage Caveman, and they changed it a little for its return in Blood Beast. I wonder if the two movies ever ended up together in a double or triple bill. That would have probably amused the kids in the audience. Someone on the classic horror film board opined that all the costume was coveralls and work boots with latex rubber thickly splashed all over them, and then over the actor's head and shoulders, the Blood Beast head and shoulders and arms. And the big parrot beak or parakeet beak or whatever it is, I think that at certain angles, the beak makes him look kind of cute. It gives him that Huey, Dewey, and Louie look. All he needs is the cap.
I don't know what this means for us, but I haven't changed in my feeling.
According to Varno, and I think he's right, the beak was longer in Teenage Caveman, and one of the Blood Beast guys says, the nose looks too Jewish. And so they shortened it a little. Varno said of Ross Sterling, who was inside the costume in Blood Beast, poor Ross was dying inside of the thing. It was probably about 125 degrees in there. Ross worked in a couple of the Cormans' pictures, and that's why all the monsters were fairly short, because Ross was a little guy, unquote. Ross Sterling went on to play one of the Leeches in Giant Leeches. Bernard Kowalski told me that he thought that the way the Cormans reused that costume, and reused everything else that wasn't nailed down, was a smart move.
To save money, the Cormans would often utilize anything that was existing and incorporate it into one of their new films. One of the philosophies that they approached their filmmaking with was, whenever they could minimize their risk, they had a better chance to have a financial success. So if they had expensive costumes already made, they would try and doctor them up. If there were standing sets at the Chaplin Studios from another film, they would paint them a different color. A very heads-up approach to being practical in the dollar area.
Corcoran is back to channeling Dr. Carrington. Why does the alien have to be killed? Why are we so quick to destroy? It's an alien, the first of its kind to come to Earth. It doesn't want to kill. Give it a chance to communicate. It's intelligent.
Yes. Why not elected mayor of this area?
So sure that it's not evil.
This isn't a battle between men.
Around this same time, Bernard Kowalski directed a bunch of episodes of the Western TV series Boots and Saddles, and Gardner McKay was one of the series' stars. McKay wrote in his autobiography that Kowalski would pop little green pills on the set. According to McKay, Kowalski called them green babies, and they kept them going. And Martin Varno confirmed this. He told me Bernie was stoned every minute. I remember we had a studio nurse, and I even remember her name. I always loved it. It was Twyla something, which was a beautiful name. First time I'd ever heard that. Twyla had a great big jar, and in the jar was a whole bunch of pills that looked like jelly beans. At the start of the day, Bernie would come and she'd open the top and he'd stick his hand in. These were uppers, which kept Bernie going. Bernie just kept things going by popping those pills. I don't think I ever saw him sober, except when he showed up in the morning.
The creature keeps coming back to me because part of it is inside of me. Why not let me lead us to it? In the daylight, in the open.
Now they're talking about how the power went out, how their watches stopped as soon as the blood beast began prowling around. That, of course, makes every viewer think of the day the Earth stood still and Klaatu, another alien prompted to visit Earth because we were starting to mess around with atomic weapons and thought we needed to be saved from ourselves. There must be one original idea somewhere in Varno's Blood Beast script, but I'm having trouble finding it. Martin Varno was nice to me, so I'll be nice to him, and I won't even mention that his, Varno's, friend, A.E. Van Vogt, wrote a science fiction short story called Discord in Scarlet, in which an alien being found floating in space gets aboard a spaceship and implants its eggs into the stomachs of a number of crew members. I won't even mention that.
That's why it's important to let the creature make it so.
While I was talking, Dave lit up his 11th cigarette. Well, this is a stressful situation.
Looks like I picked the wrong week to quit smoking.
Remember, we've agreed to give the creature every opportunity to prove itself.
Shooting through the bed triangle here. Now the cameraman is reaching a little, I think. Larry Blameyer is as big an Ed Nelson fan as I am.
In my focus on character actors over the years, I find Ed Nelson in something of a category of his own. He navigated smoothly between character actor and leading man throughout most of his career, seemingly without effort, and I guess that makes him an actor. How else can we reconcile his Twilight Zone protagonist in Valley of the Shadow and his loathsome reprobate in the thriller episode The Cheaters? He played memorable heavies and yet slipped into TV leading man role as Dr. Rossi on Peyton Place. For Monster Kids, of course, it's this movie and The Brain Eaters, Attack of the Crab Monsters, and The Devil's Partner. But overall, I don't think Ed Nelson gets enough credit.
So am I.
And, getting back to the recycling of the monster costume for I think the last time, Gene Corman gave me a one-word explanation for why that was done.
Money. We found through experience that if you exceeded a certain figure, you were not going to get that additional money back. You must remember that most of all of these films were handled by states' writers or franchise holders, so you knew pretty well going in what your cost had to be. I think all of our early films were in the area of $30,000 or $35,000 plus the lab deferment. So for each picture, we had a cost of approximately $50,000. The cost of trailers and advertising would then bring it up.
What are we going to do with the girls?
Take them with us. Better than leaving them here unprotected.
And back again to Larry Blameyer, talking about yet another movie that Martin Varno must have remembered and borrowed a few things from. It Conquered the World. The steals from It Conquered the World haven't been very noticeable up to this point, but in the last scene, you can't fail to recognize them.
Comparisons with It Conquered the World are fairly obvious, but the Blood Beast distances itself by effectively communicating, whereas the Venusian in the other film becomes just one more monster to kill. And John is more impassioned victim than Dr. Anderson's brainwashed traitor. And thanks to Michael Emmett's self-doubting sincerity, we even wonder if he might be right. Blood Beast plays with the monster movie expectation that things from outer space need to be destroyed, with heartfelt pleas for understanding and tolerance. Heck, they face the same issue of atomic self-destruction on their planet that we do. We need them, the creature claims. Ultimately, Dave and Steve don't trust the thing. Their reaction is kind of a Sure, try telling that to the missing half of Wyman's head.
Get off of this mountain. Even with these cocktails, I'm not anxious to tangle with that creature again.
Well, none of us are, but
In the October 58 issue of Nebula, Forey Ackerman reviewed Night of the Blood Beast in his column Scienti Film Previews. Well, we can't all have a knack for titles. Ackerman also described drama queen Martin Varno's reaction to seeing it for the first time.
This review, a single-time departure from the usual format of this department, might be called the biography of an abortion. A lot of blood flowed under the bridge from the time producer Gene Corman called me up seeking a writer to do a hyper-fast script for an ultra-low budget, and the fatal night a few brief months later when Jerome Bixby and I sat on either side of squirming scriptwriter Varno at the preview of his first picture, holding his hands to prevent him from slitting his throat. The guttural sounds in the theater were not all emerging from the creature from Galaxy 27 on the screen. Despite the tranquilizing effect of a shot of Soma, Varno twitched like he'd swallowed a Mexican jumping bean. He looked like he wanted to join the shrinking man in incredible smallness. Upon being carried into the foyer at the Finis, the first words of the author were, "I wish I had enough money to buy the picture and burn it." The average layman from the audience, passing by and chancing to overhear this remark, might understandably have felt it defied easy analysis. But to me, seasoned campaigner of 1,000 interplanetary diplomacy congresses and used for years to associating with slans, Varno's meaning was crystal, even tenderly clear. To the acutely attuned intelligence of the sensitive superfanish encephalon, there could not be the most minuscule umbra of dubiety that the scripter was, though this may come as a shock to some, disappointed in the result. Ron Cobb had designed a magnificent blood beast. It outthinged the thing. Unfortunately, it was never used. A cast-off hair suit from I Was a Teenage Teddy Bear or something was apparently picked up at a $29 rummage sale and reconstituted with a beak and some dyed green excelsior, so the alien looked like he was ailin' when it came close-up time.
In Famous Monsters 3, Ackerman explained why Creature from Galaxy 27 had come out as Night of the Blood Beast. Quote, "A group of teenagers caused the change. Students at a number of California high schools were asked which film, if they had a choice, they would think more thrilling to see, Creature or Night of the Blood Beast. Blood Beast won by a couple trillion red corpuscles," unquote. Reading that made me smile, because I was reminded that years ago in New York City, I interviewed Corman in front of an audience at some electronics store. He was promoting a new YouTube channel or something. And when I asked about his current activities, he mentioned an upcoming Sharktopus movie and said they were having trouble deciding between two titles, and he polled the little audience there. Needless to say, Varno's agent, Forrest J. Ackerman, remained by Varno's side and took up the cudgels for him in the Writers Guild dust-up with the Cormans. Not. Ackerman stepped away from it all. Varno told me he was pretty wimpy. He wasn't the world's greatest agent. I mean, had I been with MCA, there would be guys with lumps under their arms to see that I was taken care of. Oh well, Forey tries. He tries. I can't find that many faults with Forey. Varno summed up his battle with the Cormans for me. I learned lots, and the mangy Corman behind did get imprinted with tooth marks. Mine. The amount of money wasn't important. I embarrassed the great producer and brought to him and his operation a bit of much-needed attention from several important sources, which I understand caused him to modify his way of doing business somewhat and really pissed him off. It's an understatement to say that old Raj doesn't like me very much. Unquote. This is Bronson Canyon, and our heroes are going downhill toward the famous Bronson Caves. And again, my hat is off to the cameraman. That slope is hard to climb. It doesn't look steep here, but believe me, it is. And as you try to climb, under your feet the dirt or sand or whatever slides down. So it's almost like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. You try to climb, 2 steps forward, 1 back, it's steep, slide back some more, climb some more, you're out of breath, you pause, you turn around to look down to see how far you've gotten, and your starting point is down the hill just a little teeny bit. So somebody with the camera and all the actors getting up that high, I promise you, that took a lot of doing. We've all seen 100 or hundreds of movies showing the cave entrances. How many times have you seen them from this high angle? That's because the hill's a bitch to climb, and they don't do it. But the Blood Beast people did. The Blood Beast will tell Corcoran that he is able to speak, with Dr. Wyman's voice, by assimilation, a form of photosynthesis. Actually, he's able to speak because Martin Farno assimilated, that is to say, plagiarized, Crab Monsters screenwriter Charles B. Griffith's notion that the giant crabs can speak after ingesting the brains of their victims. Tyler McVeigh is back on the payroll, providing the voice of Dr. Wyman. From A Night of the Blood Beast book chapter by Larry Blaymeyer, here are some things to watch for in the upcoming scene. As the creature finally speaks, it echoes over a briskly cut montage of more camera setups than one would expect from a film of this budget. High angles, low, wide, wider, that elevates the material to something of far greater consequence. John, certain that he's saving mankind, sacrifices himself and the aliens growing within. As the Blood Beast is destroyed by fire, it warns, "You are not ready." It seems mere chance that the betrayal by Steve and Dave just happened to be correct. Nevertheless, the team is left expressing mixed feelings, hoping they made the right decision. Belaboring my point, watching the people come down the hill, again you can tell how steep it is. AIP released Blood Beast on a double bill with She Gods of Shark Reef, which also featured Ed Nelson. The wonderful poster tagline for Blood Beast, "No girl was safe as long as this head-hunting thing roamed the land." As always, the poster promised more than the movie delivered. Reaching down into the poster from the top is the hand of a King Kong-sized creature holding a man's disembodied head as a scantily clad girl reacts in horror. Forey Ackerman wrote about Blood Beast in FM a lot, but world-famous creatures went the extra mile, making the Blood Beast the cover boy of its 3rd issue.
That kind of immortality?
I know you want to destroy me, but listen. Please listen. I only want to help you. Millions of years ago, my people
The Blood Beast implies that on his planet, in the distant past, his ancestors blew themselves up with nuclear, atomic, whatever. A couple weeks earlier, in Teenage Caveman, a guy in that same monster costume also turned out to be a survivor of a world that destroyed itself. And an onlooker in both pictures was the inescapable Ed Nelson. Fred Olin Ray might be a fan of this movie. He released it on DVD on his Retro Media label, and, some years earlier, in his Giant Ants movie Glass Trap 2005, he had a skyscraper security guard chortling as he watches Blood Beast on TV, the scene of the Blood Beast bursting into the lab. Pretty soon Corcoran is going to start not liking what the Blood Beast is saying, and he'll turn on the Blood Beast, just like Anderson turns on the monster at the end of It Conquered the World, a scene filmed in Bronson Canyon. In fact, perhaps at the mouth of this very same cave.
How do you plan to do that?
Already it has begun. Within the hour, the first of our new generation will be born.
It's true. I can feel him inside.
The next shot, where's the camera? On top of a truck? On top of a ladder? Again, the camera guy going above, high above and beyond. For a topical movie, Blood Beast took its time getting into theaters, about 6 months. Well, that was fast compared to its co-feature, She Gods of Shark Reef. That movie was shot in 1956. Harrison's reports on Night of the Blood Beast. Those who accept the story for what it is should find it fairly interesting, for the action is quite suspenseful on occasion. The cast is unknown, but this is of no importance since the picture's draw will depend on the exploitation put behind it. The photography is good. Variety, Night of the Blood Beast is a respectfully suspenseful picture that is the better half of a new American International package. Sold with She Gods of Shark Reef, PIC lends itself to exploitation and should return ample rewards. The Hollywood Reporter. Production has been given adequate mounting in a restricted interior set and several location areas for chases. A news squib in Variety. Night of the Blood Beast has been rated B by the National Legion of Decency. The American International Productions release drew objections from the Catholic Reviewing Organization because the suicide in the plot situation is presented as an act of heroism. This is the first commentary I've done for a Roger Corman movie since he passed away a little bit ago, back in May. I interviewed him over the phone a whole bunch of times over the years, but it was one of those situations where I know him, but does he know me? He probably gave several interviews a week for all those years, so how could he know me? He always acted like he knew me, but I'm sure he was that way with everybody. So I'll never know. I do know that he always treated me extremely well, and I was going to dedicate this commentary to him. But with all the Martin Varno bitching I've told you about, I think I'd better dedicate my Giant Leeches commentary to him instead. On Giant Leeches, I'm going to tell a couple of stories about just how nice he always was that I hope you'll find interesting. After seeing all the creatures inside Corcoran through the fluoroscope, I think I would have burned Corcoran too. Big thank yous to David Schechter, Joe Induzzi, David J. Schkow, Craig Beam, Don Smeraldi, the Mighty Weaver Art Players, Gary Prang, Robert Kokai, and, from Night of the Blood Beast, the late Gene Corman, Bernard Kowalski, Martin Varno, Tyler McVeigh, and Ed Nelson. Thank you for listening.